While Republicans and conservatives think the Washington swamp is real, Democrats and progressives do not. This division of belief matters more than the existence of UFOs.
My gosh!
Because whether the swamp is real looks likely to be an issue in the 2024 presidential election. President Joe Biden would surely describe Washington as a city of bounty and benevolence, but many potential challengers disagree.
It wields its authority through a sprawling, unaccountable, and out-of-touch bureaucracy that does not act on behalf of us, but instead looms over us and imposes its will upon us.
These swamp thoughts are set in motion by what might seem to be two disconnected news stories. But for those of us who believe, the swamp covers a lot of wet ground. The first story surrounds the raid at Donald Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago and the discovery of classified documents at President Biden's home.
How can we judge and conduct oversight over whether their harm assessment is accurate?
Why? Because both the Department of Justice and Director of National Intelligence have told the Senate Intelligence Committee they won't talk to the committee about either case, because doing so would interfere with the special counsel investigations.
The notion that we're going to be left in limbo and we can't do our job, that just cannot stand.
Days later, this newspaper ran a story beneath the headline, EPA's $100 billion climate aid windfall spurs turmoil. It quoted a disgruntled community organizer in New Orleans.
They passed all this stuff and they committed funding for all this stuff, but then they didn't actually write out how it's going to work.
In other words, even the supposed beneficiaries don't know how to navigate their way through Mr. Biden's green swamp. Ronald Reagan was one of the first to popularize the notion of Washington as a destructive cesspool, committing himself to draining the swamp of bureaucracy.
Government, the people said, was not our master, it is our servant. Its only power, that which we the people allow it to have.
Well, Reagan failed. So much so that some 40 years later, House Republicans have created something called the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, led by Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, who's long known what he's up against.
When you drain the swamp fights back.
Weaponization is not a word one ever would have expected to see in the title of a congressional committee. But then few would argue that the way the FBI pitched Trump functionary Carter Page into a fact-free twilight zone of investigation through the FISA court was an abuse of power.
We're not presetting this thing to be political because that's not what it should be. We're going to follow the Constitution. Jim will follow wherever the information takes us. But this hasn't happened since 1970.
In theory, they are engaged in a useful exercise, asking these bureaucracies what they did and why.
This is about the First Amendment, something you guys used to care about. And I'd actually hoped we could get bipartisan agreement on protecting the First Amendment, the 5 rights we enjoy as Americans under the First Amendment. Your right to practice your faith, your right to assemble, right to petition the government, freedom of press, freedom of speech. Every single one's been attacked.
In reality, the committees, and by extension the American people, are not likely to learn much from the long list of public officials Mr. Jordan has ordered to appear, much like the inevitable unaccountability in this week's classified documents standoff.
I would refer you to the White House counsel. I would refer you to the White House counsel's office. Again, I would refer you to the White House counsel's office. I would refer you to the White House counsel's office. I would refer you to the White House counsel's office as they've been the ones who've been closely involved.
We don't doubt that special counsels Jack Smith and Robert Hur are conscientious public servants. But with a wave of his hand, Attorney General Garland created the ultimate swamp creature, a special counsel behind which the government's most powerful agencies can refuse to talk to elected members of Congress.
That just cannot stand.
In the meantime, Democrats have subdivided the EPA's $102 billion windfall for every conceivable green goal, all of it distributed through a swamp tributary system of nonprofits, community groups, and local officials. At his State of the Union address next week, Joe Biden will say, "Don't worry, it's all good." Myself, I don't believe in the tooth fairy, but I do believe in the swamp, sprawling, unaccountable, and on a corrupt binge.